I am very excited to welcome Katrina Spade. Katrina is the designer and inventor of a system that transforms the dead into soil, aka human composting, aka natural organic reduction. In 2017, Katrina founded Recompose, a public benefit corporation with the goal of offering earth-centric, participatory, and meaningful death care. Recompose has led the successful legalization of human composting in Washington State, Oregon, Vermont, Colorado, California, and kind of New York.
100% New York.
100% New York, not even kind of. And in 2020, Recompose began offering the service of human composting to the public. So please welcome me in joining Katrina.
Thank you.
Hi. So I wanted to start with just kind of the fundamental basics of things. And that is, what is human composting?
That is a great start. I'm going to check in. Just so everyone knows, we've got photos on a slow roll behind us, and they'll come back again. And I'll probably refer to them here and there. But for now, don't worry about just taking them in and not feeling. They're not going to coincide. If they coincide with anything we say, it will be by mistake. But but great if they do. But in general, it's to give you a sense of some things, and we'll probably touch on a lot of them. So human composting, let's see, I'll go back a little bit. I was in grad school 10 years ago now for architecture. And the beauty of architecture or grad school is that you have this luxury of time to just think about things. And I also had 2 young children, though, one of whom was at that age where every single morning it was like he grew up overnight. When you're like, oh, they're growing so fast, it's really cool. And then it occurred to me one day that I was growing at the same pace, but I didn't necessarily see it every day in the mirror, maybe every other day. But and it just hit me, this sounds a little trite a little bit, but it hit me that I was mortal and that someday that would end. And so I focused my my architecture grad school time on looking at the funeral industry. And that's because architecture isn't just buildings, it's also systems that humans have created. And so humans have created this system of caring for our dead over millennia, but in a very specific way over the last few hundred years. That just sort of sets up the like, where was my head and why did I come up with this idea? Actually, it was an epiphany moment. My friend called me on the phone and asked if I'd heard of this practice that farmers use to compost whole cows. They've been composting livestock for decades now. It's really well researched. It's a great way to dispose of an animal carcass. And did you think I might be interested about? She thought I might be interested to hear that, and indeed I was. And it occurred to me that would be a great way potentially to care for a human body after death. I should say that I was had looked at cremation and conventional burial and sort of immediately knew I didn't want either of those options, and had heard about natural burial, which is, in my mind, a beautiful concept that humans have been practicing for millennia, is still practiced all over the world in many cultures and countries, where the body is more or less placed directly in the ground to decompose with Mother Nature. And I loved that idea. But I also love living in cities. And I like the idea that the only green option I had when I died was to leave the city and go back. I grew up in rural New Hampshire, go back to somewhere rural to be buried naturally. So tying it all together, human composting was born out of those sort of sets of considerations and thought processes.
Cool. Thank you. And then how did you get from, now the Urban Death Project is what that came to be known as in about 2014. And how did that go from Urban Death Project to Recompose as a going concern?
Right. So it started as a thesis project where everyone was like, oh, great idea, Katrina. And I was like, oh, that's nice, Mom and Dad. Thanks. and some great professors. But then I started to put the idea out into the world. What if we composted our dead? And I started to grow I made a website, started to grow a little newsletter list. Some of you might be on that newsletter list today still. We still have that. I'm going to encourage you to sign up for it. Um, and like just realize that there's a dissatisfaction by so many across the globe, honestly, in that we really haven't, I'll use this phrase, we really haven't innovated the way we care for our dead in a long, long time. And not only that, we've gone away from the great ways that you could argue we've done it in the past. And then we've made these new ways that we do it now. And everyone, I mean, it's hard to find someone out there who is truly satisfied with the funeral industry as it stands, right? Broadly speaking, I'm not talking about the work you're doing, Angela, at all. I'm talking
You just added me. Thank you.
So anyway, we started to realize there's like just such an interest in re-looking at the end of life. And this is way beyond Recompose. This has been happening as the baby boomer generation is aging and seeing their parents die and going, wait, was that the best we could do with the end of life? From all the way from hospitalization, elder care, through the care of our bodies after we die. So I'm certainly not alone in thinking about this and trying to re-look at this really beautiful human event. That wasn't the question at all. Let's see.
From Urban Death Project to Recompose. It's fine. I more or less have it written down.
Nonprofit Urban Death Project we created. Yes. We then built a community, did a lot of early stage testing and development, and then founded Recompose, a public benefit corporation, in 2017 to bring it to the next level.
Could you tell us what a public benefit corporation is?
I can. I had some hesitation about creating a company when I had been running a nonprofit and where I believe there's a lot of values that need to be baked into this kind of work. And I was turned on to the idea of a public benefit corporation, which is the legal piece of what you may have heard of a B Corp, where it's like, it legally requires the company, the bylaws, and the board of directors and any investors to prioritize social and environmental goals alongside of profit. And so, it's one step and one way to make sure a company has more on its mind than just profitability.
Does that mean that it's a public corporation?
It is a private company, okay. And it's I don't know, that is a good question. Public benefit corporation. It's a legal designation, though.
And then, so I'd love to find out, since you're not on the stock market, obviously, and everyone here wants to know about investing. I'm real sly, right? I would be curious to know, how, just high level, what fundraising has been like and what that might continue to look like.
And that's a really important question because the work we've done, so if you've seen a couple of times the vessels go by, that big white array of hexagonal vessels, that's the human composting system that Recompose has developed over the last really 5 to 7 years of time, where we've done iterations and prototypes and worked with soil scientists and engineers to really create the best equipment for doing this work. And that takes money. Then we build a building, or we don't build a building, but we renovate an existing building and we make it appropriate for humans to come and spend time in and, have ritual and ceremony and holds all the equipment where we compost people. So all that takes a lot of money. And so I've been really fortunate to raise investment over the past, since 2017, from investors who are absolutely dedicated first to the mission and the values that Recompose puts forth. And so we have no venture capital, for example. That's something that just isn't a fit for Recompose. And what we're looking to do is build a really long-term sustainable business that takes care of both our clients and also our staff. Sign up for the newsletter is what I can say. Sign up for the newsletter today. And if we have opportunities for investment in the future, you'll be alerted that way.
I'd love to learn more, if you don't mind, about going from someone who suddenly realized that they are mortal to having a business that regularly are interacting with people who are grieving, and what your perspective about being with people in grief and being a part of this kind of these sacred moments, what that has been like, and if you would be interested or willing to share some stories about life day to day in Recompose.
Oh, it's such an honor even before we were working directly with clients. And Recompose has a whole team of folks, the services team that is trained and experienced at working with families in grief. I'm not on that team. And I know I have some good experience in talking with people over the years, but I wouldn't pretend to be as skilled as they are at the actual work. But I have been able to hear from so many people about how the current funeral industry scares them or disgusts them, and when it's about fear, then it's like the idea that we could build something that would in some way comfort and maybe lessen that fear of dying. However, it's not possible that we can take care of your grief when someone you love dies. I don't even pretend to be able to touch that. The one thing we can do is make an option that feels like it's returning folks to the earth, and that it's taking that fear and that just inappropriateness but for so many people, that's what it feels like. We're taking that out of the equation and leaving you hopefully with something that comforts.
So the conclusion of the human composting process results in soil. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. What do folks, well, first of all, how much soil is produced?
Well, I think I should back up because you did ask, what is human composting? And I just never answered that question. Oh yeah, right there. There's that right there is a box of human compost. It's 64 ounces, this big. And every family gets one of those boxes unless they really don't want it. And half of our families also take the rest of the cubic yard that is produced per person who is composted. Okay, what is a cubic yard? I'm looking around here. Cubic yard is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. So it fits pretty well. It fills the back of a pickup truck. And so now I'm going to tell you about the process real quick. Why are we making a cubic yard of soil per person? Well, the process happens inside of a vessel. So the difference between natural burial and human composting, the very basic difference is that natural burial takes land, which means in my book, it's really appropriate for rural settings and maybe even suburban settings, but it's not an urban solution for the millions of us who live in cities, billions of us who live in cities. Lots of people live in cities. And so what we've created at Recompose with the vertical stacking vessels is a more urban appropriate system. Each one of those vessels gets used by one person for about 30 days, and then it is cleaned out and used again. I do like to think of it as a hotel for the dead. Like, you get to go into that vessel for a month, and the basic process inside, it's not terribly complicated. There's about 4 things that are happening inside of the vessel. Number 1, it's backing up. Composting is very accurate, can be accurately described as what's happening on the forest floor. When you walk into a forest and underfoot, there's that soft, springy pine needle base. And if you dig down a few inches, you get to topsoil. All of that dead organic material, pine needles, leaves, sticks, chipmunks, have decomposed naturally and created topsoil. That process requires oxygen, so that's like the breeze, and requires moisture from the rain, of course. And it's happening because of naturally occurring microbes that are breaking things down all over the world constantly. We're mimicking that inside of the vessel. Our pine needles and leaves are wood chips, alfalfa, and straw. So Recompose starts with a mixture of that and lays it into the vessel. Then we place the person's body on top and cover it with more of the same. The person's body is shrouded, by the way, up until the very last moment when we take the shroud away and close the door. So we're actually composted as naked as the day we were born. That person is shrouded. That's not a real person. This is a reenactment. Should probably have a little something because everyone's like, I'm looking. No, that is importantly a shrouded mannequin that we set up for a photograph. You're welcome. Good to notice that. So we lay this mixture of plant material down. We place the person's body on top of it and then cover it with more of the same. And then over the next 30 days, we are providing oxygen to the naturally occurring microbes. So we're constantly pulling air through each of those vessels. And then we're also recording the temperature inside the vessel. So there's 2 temperature probes. And that's telling us if the microbes are happy and doing their work. Every time this happens, it blows my mind still to this day, but we place a person's body. It's typically been refrigerated for a few days ahead of what we call the laying in. And so the material inside is around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And typically on day 1.5 to 2, we see a spike inside to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not placing any heat mechanically or otherwise into the vessel. That's microbial activity at work. And yeah, it really never ceases to amaze me. After that temperature rise, we need to see by law temperatures hover above a magic number of 131 degrees Fahrenheit. It's actually from livestock composting regulations. It ensures pathogens are killed off and the resultant soil we give back is safe. When the temperatures start to fall again, we rotate each vessel slowly. So that's the 4th thing that the vessels do. And so we rotate typically once a week. Everything is mixed up. The air is able to get to everything. The microbes continue to do their work. About day 30 to 40, we remove the soil. Our staff does. Also not my job. I have done it before. It's no longer my job. To remove the soil, screen for non-organics like a titanium hip or other non-organics, and then we mechanically reduce any remaining bone. So some of the bone is broken down in that really rapidly in that first 30 days, and whatever isn't broken down, we reduce then, and I'm almost done with the process. Everything is then placed into a curing bin, and this is actually right like this. This is a cubic yard container filled now with human compost, which we let continue to cure for another 2 to 4 weeks. Everyone gets a small box, and about half of our families come to our site, which is in Seattle, by the way, and pick up the full cubic yard.
And then cool things can happen with that soil because this is human compost. This is very rich loam. So do you have any stories or anecdotes about interesting things that folks have done with soil?
Well, I should say the other half of families. Oh, it's not quite right. You've seen the forest photo go by. That's not just a random stock image. That's a photograph of Bell's Mountain, which is the conservation partner we have in Washington State. 700 acres of land, mostly forest, lots of meadow also, that was mismanaged in the 30s and 40s and improperly logged and never, I guess forests sometimes, they seem to be healthy, they seem to have restarted, but they haven't matured. They aren't able to get past a certain level of forestness. And the nonprofit that owns this land was going to buy compost because the forest needed biomass and nutrients. And instead, we were connected with them. And so now about half of our families choose to donate their people's soil to this forest land. It goes to all sorts of projects. It goes to planting seedlings, broad distribution on meadows and forests and other things. So that's about, again, half of our families. And I love that because, first of all, a cubic yard is a lot. And second of all, there's something very sacred about the material we're creating on the one hand. It used to be a person. On the other hand, this is a way for us to go back to the forest, literally, and to know that we're not going to be in one place, ever again. And so that soil is going to the forest, and the forest is absorbing it into the world again. And I like that it's a way to acknowledge that our molecules will be part of something else really, really clearly. Now, back to your question. I have to say, I don't like to pick favorites, but my favorite story of someone using the soil that they came and got was a person named Marie. Her brother Wayne died, and she has shared this story with press, and I know she'd be happy for me to share it with you. So Wayne, her brother, died, and Marie came to Recompose with a trailer, as we instruct, bring a pickup truck or a trailer. And she brought the trailer to Recompose, and our staff, our human composting specialist staff, helped load that trailer with human compost and put a tarp on it, strap it down, and then off she went. And Wayne was a gardener, and he lived in Queen Anne, which is a neighborhood in Seattle. And so Marie drove his compost to his former neighborhood, and all of his friends, his neighbors, came with 5-gallon buckets, and they got a little bit of Wayne's soil, or a lot, and brought it to their own gardens. And I just like the idea of them gardening with him, kind of, is really special. So that's got to be my favorite.
That's incredible. Let's see here. I wanted to ask, let me look through my notes. We talked a little bit about how human composting is really great for densely populated urban areas. Are there other advantages that human composting has versus just natural burial or green burial?
Yeah, so human composting is really a response to cremation and conventional burial. Both cremation and conventional burial, and when I say, first of all, I'm on purpose not saying traditional burial, because traditional implies that it's something we've been doing forever. Conventional burial was really invented by what is now the funeral industry in the 1860s, I would say, when modern embalming was invented as a way to preserve bodies and a great way to sell something to people. That suddenly we all thought that we should have preserved our body, and lots of language was used around protecting it from Mother Nature, protecting the body from Mother Nature, and eschewing the natural process of decomposition. So I specifically say conventional burial when I'm talking about embalming, and the casket and the concrete grave liner. That's another thing that happens almost always in cemeteries today. All of that has a environmental toll that comes from the manufacture and transport of the concrete grave liner, the casket, the headstone, and also the upkeep of the cemetery forever. And so you look at that has a carbon footprint. And then over here you have cremation, which has become extremely popular. It's more than 50% of Americans today, and expected to get to 70, 80% in the next couple of decades. And it has, it uses fossil fuels and emits mercury and particulates and carbon into the atmosphere. So interestingly, those have about the same carbon footprint. I'll be honest, when I started this design exercise, it was more about creating something that resonated than it was about hating the other options. They're what we have. They're okay. I'm sure that felt truthful. But I do want to be careful. If you love fire, or have certainly a faith reason or a cultural reason for cremation, then cremation is great. But I think for a lot of people, we're choosing it just as a default. So if we're choosing it without intention and without loving it in some way or another, then wouldn't it be nice if we had something else to choose? Okay, so those both have a carbon footprint. And so what composting is able to do is avoid those emissions, but also we're sequestering carbon during the process. So we're taking the carbon from the wood chips, our bodies, and we're placing it into the ground, into soil, which then goes on the ground. the total savings for carbon wise is a little over a metric ton per person who chooses it, which is decent. It might not solve climate change, but so our new goal here at Recompose is to surpass cremation. That's going to take, like, I'm thinking 30 years from now, we can surpass cremation as the default choice of death care. And I love when people are choosing things intentionally, but I wouldn't mind if people started to choose human composting. Like, yeah, that's just what I don't even care. That's what we're going to do. So go for the unintentional choice too. I think for a lot of people, though, the soil creation and the returning to the earth is as or more important than the carbon savings. I think maybe that's me particularly, but like it just feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that when I talk to people about what they want at their end of life for themselves, it feels like an incredibly personal choice, and that people have preferences and they have strong opinions as a result of their personal preferences for other people as well. And so I think it's just kind of fascinating that everyone's like, I do not want that for me. I do not want this for me. I want this for me. And that everybody has some strong opinion about that. When really, I mean, if you think about anything that we do with dead people too deeply, it's unpleasant. I would just say so. Finding the least unpleasant option for you. It's cool. I was wondering if you would be interested in sharing some of your proudest moments with Recompose.
Well, my most recent proudest moment, there's sort of like, with a 1-2 punch in a good way, which was that we legalized in the first state, legalized human composting in 2019 in Washington State. And then since then, we've legalized the process in Oregon, Colorado, Vermont, and then the 1-2 punch was California and then New York State, which is like, yeah.
Very hard fought.
It's just so cool. And there's work happening in lots more states, including Minnesota. Yeah. And I honestly, 6 states, and we started in earnest in 2018, let's say. So that's 5 years, 6 states. I truly think we'll see another 6, maybe this year, if not this year and next year, because we've done the hard work of proving the process works. We've got operators. Recompose is not the only provider of this service. All of a sudden, I'm proud to say, and I kind of am seriously proud, but it's like one of those tough ones. We are not the only provider. We've got movement in 6 states. We've got laws that have been passed in 6 states and regulations. I'm especially proud of Washington State's regulations, actually, because they really are set up to make sure that operators or providers of this process are following best practices for human composting. What I don't want to have happen is to have, a number of providers come up around and suddenly people are like, wait, what is this new thing that just emerged, and is it being carefully tracked and regulated? And the answer is yes. And that I think is really important piece of all this, is to make sure that we're not just establishing this niche option or this one-off option, that we're really trying to make this something available everywhere, best practices followed, and just make sure we're doing it right. So I guess that's another proud moment.
That's a big one. I was looking up the California law, even though I don't live there. I was a little curious. And I noticed that the California law just passed this last September, but it won't go into effect until 2027. And I was wondering if you can share a little insight about why the wait.
Well, most states have there's 2 parts to this happening. One is the statute has to be passed, and that's through usually Senate and Assembly or House have to pass a law and saying this idea is allowed or this practice is allowed. And then the next piece is regulatory. And depending on the state, different regulatory agencies would be involved or are involved in regulating the process. In Washington State, it's the Funeral Board with the Department of Licensing and the Board of Health. So both of those agencies had to write regulations what do providers of natural organic production, that's the legal, have to do in Washington state? In Washington, that took about a year to craft those regulations and get them passed by those agencies. In California, things move slower, and I think there's just more agencies. So they said we need 4 years to get through the regulations. Whether they need 4 years or not, I'm not sure, but 2027 is going to be here in like a second. So, so just don't worry. Okay.
Are there any other holdups or similar delays from the New York law that's just been passed?
That is still emerging. I think it will be shorter than California, but New York is actually a little bit of a funky state with its funeral law, so it's a bit of a different course.
And then for all of us who likely care most about this process actually being legalized in Minnesota, I understand that last year, and anyone who's been involved in any of this legislative work, please just like grunt loudly or raise your hand or correct me. And that is, my understanding is that last year in the legislative session, that there was a bill introduced both in the House and the Senate by Representative Hewitt and Senator Marty and something that starts with an E, Eaton. Yep. And that it died in committee, which is another loss that we can mourn. But I'm not sure if it's going to be, if there are thoughts about how it's going to be reintroduced. And I don't know if you know or if the audience knows about what's going to be happening in Minnesota.
Raise your hand if you're well aware of this bill. Okay, so that's, oh, there's somebody there. So what I'm not volunteering you exactly, but if you wanted to stick around after, and people who were interested in learning more about the Minnesota bill could maybe meet you somewhere in this room.
Like straight in the back. Mm-hmm.
So I think people could contact his office if they want to get involved with, advocacy for the bill. And I'm not sure what the timeline is.
Yeah.
Does anyone know?
Yeah.
So,
But I think John Marty is the name to know.
John Marty
Senator.
and Hewitt is definitely the other one.
Yeah.
If you sign up for the Recompose's newsletter, we're working really hard to, let's see, part of our work is public policy. We've never stopped doing that, and we're not planning to stop doing that. It's just we've absorbed it as part of our mission and part of our work. It's got to be. We also love it. Like, it's so cool to see things like this spread. So we don't yet have exactly the system created, but what we're trying to do is, if you sign up for our newsletter, we're going to be able to eventually connect you to others here in Minnesota who are working on the same thing and want to like grassroots together. But seriously, come and sign up for our newsletter, recompose.life, and we will let you know via that newsletter, hey, Minnesotans, this is happening. We need to put some advocacy here. It's time to put some pressure on. So we're able to do it pretty well to connect people. We're hoping to get the next level better where we can really connect folks for grassroots work.
Cool. Thank you. Let's see here. I also wanted to know, speaking of legislation and how these things get through, what kind of challenges have you faced or resistance and lessons from that?
Well, it has been a long journey, and I'll just start by saying the way I've overcome the challenges has been one foot in front of the other on a day-to-day basis. No question, that's how it goes. It's just like, gonna keep trying, working at this. But also the energy of the community of people we're building around the world to change the end of life has actually, it's truly been the engine that has allowed me and my team to keep going. If we thought nobody wanted this, it would be really hard to get up in the morning and like one foot in front of the other. So that kind of energy, I know it's going to sound a little woo. It's just true. Like we can feel it when there's that community momentum out there. And sometimes it's because people go email, thank you so much for what you're doing. But sometimes it's just because we know that there's a lot of excitement and energy out there for this. That's how we've overcome the challenges. The main opposition to the bills so far has been Catholic opposition. The Catholic Church has been technically and officially against, I think, each bill in each state so far. But I will say they've also been relatively lukewarm opposed. Like, what I mean by that is there's not a ton of energy put forth from that church conference religion against the idea. They're just making it clear that the Catholic Church does not think that human composting is respectful. That's the phrase that's often used. I have feelings about that. I think it's the most respectful way you could care for a human body after death. But thank you. But I will say there's lots of other faith communities and leaders of faith that have reached out to say this fits really well with what we do. So I don't want to make too big of a deal about Catholic opposition. I think it's interesting, frankly, and I think it is true that it's official and prevalent, but it's not something that has slowed us down, I don't think. I think there's definitely some of the industry at first was like this weird idea from Seattle. Fair. Yes. And then maybe was a little like threatened by a kind of sea change that's happening broadly in the industry. And again, this is not just Recompose bringing this change. There's death doulas working. There's natural burial advocates working. There's people deciding to take the death of a loved one a little more into their own hands. All of that is disruptive to an industry that's been around for many years. And it's time. And it's happening. And it's just really cool. So there's been some like maybe disgruntledness by some in the industry, but then there's also amazing funeral directors, morticians, funeral homes, etc. So that's been a little more mixed, I'd say.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. I want to check the time. I think it might be a good time to transition into some of what everybody else actually wants to hear. Oh, and so, yeah, if you could raise your hand, I'll call on you and they will bring a mic. And the first hand I had was in the third row in the middle.
Thank you for being here. I remember watching your video from Ask a Mortician like years ago, so I'm a little fangirling here. So wondering about the processes that go along with a service that might happen at Recompose versus the conventional funeral. Given embalming, I would assume obviously a body's not going to compose if it's been embalmed. So there's a certain window of time after death that might be needing to be considered in order to have this type of burial. And then also just within your structures that you have, do you have the setup there to have like the memorial service as part of the process, or is it two separate things where conventionally it happens, whether at a church or a chapel or memorial funeral service kind of a thing before burial or cremation happens? So just kind of like that, if you could talk about the technical pieces of how the services might differ from a conventional burial or cremation to a Recompose.
Thank you. That's such a good question. See where we are here. Ah, that building. Oh, and this one too. This here is the gathering space, and that is the threshold vessel. It is adjacent and in fact built inside of the space that you've seen now 20 times or so with the array of vessels. The space with the array of vessels is where we have our active composting vessels. Those are the ones you see. The gathering space we designed to have a ceremony for families to have a ceremony before a laying in of a body to the active composting vessel. The threshold vessel is a doorway from that space into what we call the greenhouse, where the composting happens. Typically for a service, the body is laid out just like you saw on the cradle that we've designed. And that cradle is used to load the body into both the threshold vessel, but also then into the composting vessel. And then family, what we've seen is music playing. We've seen someone officiate. Our staff can also officiate. They're all celebrants by trade. And sometimes the leader of faith will come and weave their tradition into what's happening. Typically, we're talking about in some way about the return to nature. But of course, it's all focused on the person who has died, just like a memorial service would be. At the end, family and friends place wood chips and straw on the body as a ritual, but also a practical next step of the sort of recognition of and preparation for the journey that's about to happen. We also sometimes see folks are able to place other things like plant matter, flowers. We can do pages of books ripped up. So sometimes we'll see stuff like that. Anything that can decompose quickly in a matter of weeks can go in with the person's body. So that's what happens in the gathering space. Technically, you're right. We don't embalm bodies because it's completely antithetical to what we're doing or trying to have happen. And so, but we can use refrigerated space. So we have refrigerated space on site. A body technically, biologically, could hang out for a long, long time before it needs to be composted. Anything that's happening is really same-ish. It's like going the right direction. But the longer a body has been dead, the less it might be appealing to have, say, the face showing or any parts of the body showing. So that's a discussion that family and friends have with our services team.
I saw a question on that side, in the inside, the back and side. Yeah.
Here's the $1 million question. How much is this?
Oh, good.
And if it's, how cost inhibitive is this? And if so, what challenges does that pose to this being a very exclusive practice for the wealthy? And how do we make this more inclusive and available to the broader community?
I'll give you context first. Thank you for asking that question. The average conventional burial today starts around $15,000, but could go up from there. In New York, I don't think you can get a plot, no matter how much money you have. So it depends very much on the casket choice and the plot you buy and all that. But let's hold the 15 grand and up in our minds for the conventional burial. Green burial, it is actually, I can't speak to Minnesota, but you might be able to. In Seattle, it's about $7,000 with funeral home work, the plot, and transport and everything like that. Cremation is going to be the cheapest option, probably forever. I know that you can usually get a cremation very direct for about $1,000. And I think that'll probably remain the cheapest option for quite some time. It's interesting, however, the average cremation in the US with a funeral is about $6,100. So what I'm showing you is there's a huge range, and that cremation is the cheapest option. Recompose's full service package, but not including the gathering space, is $7,000. That's always been something that's been on my mind, how to make it as inclusive as possible. The one other thing Recompose does is we have a community fund, and this is a great moment to pitch it to you all, because our community fund directly subsidizes people who can't afford $7,000, all the way down to $300. So we have a fund, people can apply for it, and you can contribute to it. It's very easy to do. We have something called the Recompose shop. You can also buy a t-shirt there. Profits go to the community fund, but you can also just give money right through that website. It is shoprecompose.life. So thank you for asking that question.
We're on the outside.
Thank you. I'm curious to know what the demand is like now in the states where this is legal. And secondly, related to that, until we get it legalized here in Minnesota, which was going to be my first question, is like, how do we do it? But I didn't realize there were efforts already. Are people from states like Minnesota allowed to come there? And is there enough capacity? So, if I go next week, they could truck me out in a refrigerator to Colorado or something.
You would be amazed
Well, quickly, I just want to say that there are laws about transporting dead folks across state lines. So there might be some other barriers related to that. But
33% of our clients come from out of state. 33% last year. The year before that, it was a little bit less. But we've had folks fly to us from West Virginia. I won't list all the states, but like really different states all over the country. It's perfectly legal to fly a body unembalmed. To fly a body, you want to work with a local funeral home because they will help you figure out how to do that legally and, well. I don't know what not well looks like. But we do encourage people to drive their loved ones to us. Our team is set up to help people with that. I don't know. You'd be crossing so many state lines that you'd need a lot of paperwork ready to go. But in general, you can do it. You just have to have your ducks in a row and say why the body is not embalmed. But we can help you with that. And so the way if you died here in Minneapolis and you wanted to be composted, you would want you and your loved ones would work with a local funeral home that would cover the transport. We'll pick you up at SeaTac. And the cost is additional. So that transport is something you'd work out with the local funeral home. When we pick you up at SeaTac, that begins your journey with us. We try not to send cubic yards of soil around the country. But then again, we have, because people are like, but I want it back. And so if you're wondering about the carbon footprint, it does reduce the benefit, but as far as my math goes, it doesn't negate it totally. So it's still a good benefit. And if it feels meaningful to people, I mean, I flew here yesterday. So I don't want to be a hypocrite. I think if it feels meaningful, people should have it. And until we're in Minneapolis, that's an option.
Straighten that back. Yes. Just wait for the mic.
Could you tell us more about the microbes involved? And are you introducing additional decomposing agents like that you would find in a natural ecosystem? Or is it just the microbes that are present in the body that are able to do the whole process?
I'm so excited that somebody's asking about the science. Thank you so much. I was like, no, don't get too nerdy, Angela. Thank you.
Everyone's going to be so disappointed now when I answer the science question, because I am not a scientist. I've said that from the beginning, just to be clear. We do not have to inoculate with like a mix of microbes. I am going to brag. We have worked on this recipe of wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, and the exact ratios of those materials for so long that, and also the moisture content, the aeration, that we are getting exactly what we want from the naturally occurring microbes. They're in our bodies, yes. They're also on our bodies. I think they're in the air as we speak, and they're also on the wood chips and the straw. I can't give you names of those microbes. That would be a great thing for me to just rattle off like the 4 main microbes. It would sound so cool. Like I knew what I was talking about, but I can't do that. But I can tell you they're, thermophilic, which means they are heat loving. And so they work in thresholds of heat up to 160. Then they start to die off from that heat. If they've made that much, then they basically started to die off, but kill themselves. But they're happiest in 120 to 160 degrees, which is quite a bit hotter than your normal at-home compost pile. So I hope that answers your question, even though it wasn't super sciencey.
Well, and then also they're generally aerobic microbes versus anaerobic.
They are.
And so the anaerobic ones are the ones that make people who are dead smell really bad. So aerobic bacteria and microbes are going to keep that process aerated and fresh. I got to go with former Senator Carolyn Lane. Hang on for a mic. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. I just retired from the Minnesota Senate 2 years ago. And I want to say that, this is a passion that maybe now I can get into something again. And I would just be able to offer a focus point for people who are interested in participating in anything that happens at the House or Senate. And I can have a list and we can have some kind of contact. Maybe we can discuss how to do it. So I can talk to John Marty and I can talk to some of the people that are chairs that would be necessary. And now that we have a more progressive House, Senate, and governor, maybe this is the year.
Yeah, you guys. Yes.
And how should people get in touch with you?
Pardon?
How should people get in touch with you?
I can start here, but I can give you my email. Carolyn Lane, CarolynLaine, Carolyn Lane @gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank
Great.
you.
So, for those of you not with the microphone, this human in the striped sweater will be right there. Will be in the very back of the room collecting names and emails. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Let's remember this moment because I mean, not kidding. What if we did this in a year and then we were like celebrating the Bills passing?
Yes, yes. Put it on your calendar. Yeah, the return trip. Do we have another question? I'm trying to see how we were doing on time. Right in the front. Cool.
Hi. So I'm just wondering what sort of people are working on the compost side of things? Is it gardeners, morticians? Who do you hire for that?
Great question. Yeah, we have two main teams at our facility in Seattle. And real quick note, we're working next on opening a facility in Denver, just so that you know. And that's all I want to say about that. Two main teams that work at our facility. One is a services team that I've mentioned. They're made up by Washington state law, by a fair number of licensed funeral directors, and then some associated staff. And then on the other side, we have what we call NOR operators, or human composting specialists. And that team is really much more, it's a new emerging kind of job, career. And these folks are tending to the body. They're tending to what is also a relatively industrial process. We are in a warehouse. We work with large equipment to move things around. And then we have this equipment and we have to, all the considerations of safety and all that. So it's an interesting combination of like industrial and gardener type tending to a body's decomposition. And so we have folks who have been involved in gardening or landscaping, a few people worked in museums randomly, permaculture folks, but we train at Recompose. So you could come with a host of experience. And the main thing is that the work suits you, really. And that means that both being around decomposing bodies suits you, and that's not for everyone. And working in a warehouse, environment suits you. So those are some of the things we look for in people who would be a good fit for the job. And it might be any kind of industry that they're coming from.
I have to go with outside fifth row. You right there in the with the humanness.
Yes, I am a human. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to ask about your outreach and marketing and how few people find out about you. Do funeral directors tell people about your options? Do people find out in hospitals? Do only a few people know? Are you like putting placards on buses? Like what are you doing to get people to you? And where are you targeting this information?
Ooh, that sounds like one of our internal meetings. Like, what are we doing? We've been blessed with lots of earned media. So many, many people, in fact, someone who died recently in Pennsylvania came to us from Pennsylvania. We asked her daughter, how did your mom find out about us? And she said, she read about you in a magazine. We don't know what magazine. We don't know when that happened. So it is true that lots of people learn about us from earned media. The press, not surprisingly, if you say the words human composting, the press is like, I will write about that because people will probably read it. So it's been a really nice relationship. I joke, but I'm grateful to all the press for writing about this idea. Recompose goes and presents at senior living facilities, to hospice volunteers, to estate law folks. I would love to have a thing on the bus someday. I'm not kidding. I would love that. We're not quite there yet, but we advertise on KUOW, which is our NPR station. So there's the whole like NPR voice saying you can be composted when you die. One of the things that's really great with our outreach is that you can pre-arrange for Recompose's service today with Recompose. And That my sister-in-law came up with that, and I was like, I will love you forever because that is good. So pre-compose. So we have like over 1,000 people that have pre-arranged. You can pay $100 a month, and know that you'll eventually come to us for wherever we are closest to you. Come to us for your service. So that's a nice way of being like outreach. Now it doesn't only have to be to people who are at the end of their lives, but it's a great question. And in terms of our clientele, we have lots of folks you might imagine who are like progressive environmentalists, love the environment and think about maybe even think about their climate footprint. We also have libertarians who love what we're doing. Don't tell me what to do with my body when I die. I'll decide for my family and for me what I do with my body when I die. Or we have farmers who are like, I know very well the beauty and importance of the land and the soil. And in fact, I've composted a couple of horses, and I would love that for me when I die. So we have Texas legislation emerging, and the messaging, you're talking about outreach and marketing, the messaging there is like the land and choice. And that's for all of us, that's the messaging, right? It is about choice. We should have more options, and we should be able to decide, for heaven's sakes, what happens to our own bodies when we die. So thank you.
I think we've got time for, we're going to wrap. Oh, we're wrapping it up. Oh, can I take one more?
Yeah.
One more. Right back there. Really, really urgent. Yeah, you. Oh, hi, Jane. Wait for the microphone.
You can hear me. I'm curious, the iterations that you went through, right? You're in your architecture school and you're thinking about human composting. Because for some strange reason, I have a picture of you on the top of a huge pyramid that in my head is like a giant compost pile. So can you just go through some of the stages? And then just lastly, I really want to know about the picture, and I assume it's the green room you're in surrounded by plants, but I don't think you've talked about it yet.
I watched that. You watch that. Let me know when that photo comes out. I think that is a photograph. Early on in grad school, I built with some friends what's called a pain mound, which is a compost heating system. Early, I mean, I wasn't thinking about people yet. I was thinking about heating the water for a greenhouse. That's the greenhouse where our 33 active composting vessels reside. And we have space in Seattle for 54 total. To answer a question I didn't before, we're not at capacity right now. We're about half of our vessels filled at any one time. And as we grow to closer to capacity, we'll add more vessels. At some point, we won't be able to add more vessels, but that'll be a good problem to have from my perspective in a way. So we have plenty of capacity right now. I worked on a lot of prototypes. I know what you're thinking of maybe. Initially, the design was for a large composting core where we would collectively be placed in and be composted together. And though that was a beautiful concept, I think, it was really, in retrospect, hard to pass a law that might allow a big composting core of collective. So I didn't know exactly why I switched from that concept to individual vessel system. I wanted to test, and I knew it would be easier to test with an individual system. Then it became like, why not do it this way? And in retrospect, it's like, we would not have passed laws with the other version. So it's an individual vessel. Each person gets their own for that month-long period, and then we use it for another person. And there's been lots of prototyping, lots of working with great people, experts in soil science and legal and engineering. And I also say I didn't know I would love being a CEO. I love it very much. It's exciting from day to day. I get to think about building this thing with the values intact and to last. So I love it. Love the work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Please. Katrina, I am so incredibly grateful to you for joining us, for flying into the frozen north in the dead of winter, the winteriest winter day we have had. I'm so grateful to all of you for being a part of this and for bringing your enthusiasm and your energy for like the first innovation in death care disposition since formaldehyde. which, and this is way cooler.
Great tagline.
Right? That's no extra charge. But thank you again so much. Remember, there is going to be an amazing human taking names and emails if you are interested in helping our legislative efforts. And big ups to Representative/Senator Carolyn Lane, Emeritus, for your thoughts as well. I'm so grateful for everyone. And I will turn it over to, there was other things. Oh, no, there's no other sessions. Have a great rest of your day.
Yay, thank you.
Stay warm.